Dude can preach. Huh? The Kool-Aid guy. Yeah, it wasn't Kool-Aid. It was another kind of drink, but yeah, everyone thought it became Kool-Aid to drink the Kool-Aid. Jim Jones is the People's Temple. He's preaching. They're singing. Looks like a church, doesn't it? It's like a church service. They're all packed in. They're all wearing, guys are wearing shirts and ties, Miss Kepner. The ladies all dressed up in the nice dresses, their best outfits to hear, right? And I'm imagining some of you are actually listening to what he's saying, right? Is he preaching religion? Does he preach religion? Does he actually mention God? He said he's performed resurrections. He's raised people from the dead, apparently. Healed people. The people at the beginning were up giving their testimonies, right? Like sometimes you see in Christian churches, I just got to tuck up my shirt here. I had some canker sore on my toe. Hurt me greatly. But then I came to Pastor Joe and he laid his hands on me and it went away. Right? They're giving their testimonies. I came to Brother Jim, and doctor said I had cancer. They showed me the x-ray. Brother Jim laid his hand on me. The cancer is gone. So he was apparently known as be a faith healer and stuff like that. He wasn't. A lot of times it's kind of like professional wrestling, when everyone's involved, the referees, the people, that you see, like the wrestler comes down the aisle and takes some, I don't know, some sign from some kid and tears it up. It's like, oh, boo, boo, we hate you. But you find out like the kid is, like one of the wrestler's kids. They're all in on the joke, on the gag. The same thing with this. People would come in wheelchairs. I can't walk, Pastor Jim. Places his hand on their head, and they get up and they start dancing. Miss Voles, dancing. Of course, the lady was like the church secretary. She was not a cripple. She just got in the chair so she could. It was all fake, but he thought all religion was fake. He was an atheist. Most of the people in that building were atheists. They didn't believe in God. They were Marxists. They were Marxist socialists. Building a king, not looking for a kingdom in heaven. They want to build their kingdom on earth. Which is why eventually they moved to Guyana, set up their perfect society. And then, when that kind of fell apart, they all killed themselves. That's when they drank the cyanide. Willingly. He's not a murderer. He didn't kill them. I know he's a monster. People think he's a monster now, but they all willingly did it. They wanted to do it. It was revolutionary suicide, as they called it. It was protest against a world that wouldn't leave them alone because they were afraid the American government we were going to send troops down to Guyana and take over their compound and send them all back to the United States because various things. They killed the congressman. When he came to show up and visit their group down in Guyana, they killed him. So, writing was kind of on the wall. Anywho, nothing religious about it. And yet, it's got all the elements of religion. He's dressed in a robe. They're singing hymns. Nothing about God in those hymns. Standing up, waving your hands, giving testimonies about not what God has done for you, but what Pastor Jim has done for you. Talking about the kingdom that is yet to come. Of course, we're creating that kingdom, not a God or a savior. But, that was his genius. Not saying he was necessarily a good man, so I'm not, whatever. So I'm recording this. But what his genius was, his special sauce was, his secret sauce was to use the trappings of religion, because then he was able to kind of like get his message out there. That if he just walked around in like a business suit saying, Karl Marx was right. Religion is the opiate of the people. It's a drug. It's a form of control. You got to pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. Well, he might not have gotten listened to, but if he looked like a reverend, a minister, people might be kind of like that instinctive respect, like, okay, at least listen to him. Or elected mayor of New York City. What is religion? Okay, I got a little bit to finish on. What is religion? How's it going, Ms. Wambold? Ms. Wambold, right? Okay, good. Okay, ultimate reality, the sacred. Okay, so a little bit to talk, and then I'll move on to a very brief discussion of religious studies, which this course is not, but I feel that it's good to talk about it, just to give you some knowledge of what's going on, how the course is progressing. I'm going to do ultimate reality. Hold on, the last page. Turn the page up. Okay, the sacred. Okay, ultimate. What I'm calling ultimate reality, for lack of a better term, a lot of religious studies scholars would classify as the sacred or the holy. Okay, the sacred or the holy, which will be their word for this realm of existence that is different from the normal, ordinary world. Okay, yes? Okay, basically, what the sacred is, here's my definition for it: a transcendent, enduring, powerful order. You could also say maybe energy as well, but order in the cosmos that is ultimately real and meaningful. So it's not almost like, isn't that just like saying it's ultimate reality, Dr. Dunn? Yeah, kind of, I guess. It's another word for ultimate reality, basically. All right, but that's my definition, so that's what I'll stick to. All right, but basically the same thing as ultimate reality. You just call it the sacred instead of ultimate reality, or the holy. And the word sacred, sacer, it comes from Latin sacer, which means dedicated. Anything that was dedicated to the gods was set apart. The idea of holiness, I know we use holiness in the sense of goodness, like you say someone's a holy person, you think of it in the sense of righteous, they do the right thing, he does the right thing, she does the right thing, or they talk about Jesus all the time. They're always thinking about God, something like that. We usually use it in that kind of positive sense of a person who's living a positive life. Okay, a good person, you might say. Another way of putting it, yeah, or maybe not, right? But you with me? At least for now. We'll see how the semester progresses. Doherty? All right. I gotta get it. Anyways, but it basically the word anything that's holy, it doesn't really refer to an ethical stance, really. It's just anything that was separated, demarcated off, and dedicated to the supernatural, to ultimate reality itself, i.e., the gods. So a place was sacred because that's the gods' space, that's their temple, so you can't go there. Okay? Or if you go there, you have to act a certain way because it's like the god's house, right? Or a person is sacred. A person might be dedicated to a god or a goddess. Okay, so you have to treat them differently than any other human person, et cetera, et cetera. And, all sorts of sacred things, sacred words, sacred texts and writings, sacred places, as I mentioned, sacred objects, right? Anything that's been dedicated to a god or a spirit is for their use. It's not for normal use anymore. Okay? Yes, you could use this as a cup, but if I dedicated it to God, and gave it to a local Catholic church, and they used it in their special ceremony, the Lord's Supper, the Mass, the Eucharist, whatever you call it, they're not going to call it a cup anymore, they call it a chalice, yes? Even though the Latin word calyx simply means a cup, just a cup, right? But, for example, if the priest, when he's changing the bread and wine into the body of Christ, will say, at least over the wine, which becomes the blood of Christ, this is my blood, the blood of the new covenant. Or Jesus, that's not what I want to say. In the build up to that statement, the priest will say, on the night before Jesus died, he took the chalice. Or did they just say took the cup? You know, could have just translated the Latin. It's based on the Latin. Cups. Could have just said cup. But no, they want to translate it chalice because they want to make that connection between, yes, the original cup that Jesus used with wine in this whatever meal it was that Jesus celebrated with his followers, with the actual cup the priest is now using at the Lord's Supper, the chalice. So they want to make that direct connection. So I understand why they did that translation rather than just saying usual cup. Because by the word, they want to indicate the sacredness, that it's not a normal cup. It's become something else because it's dedicated to the service of God's worship in the Mass. So it's a chalice now. So the sacred or the holy. And this is probably, this idea of the sacred or ultimate reality is what defines religion, I think. Okay? Peter Metcalf in a Dictionary of Anthropology. So an anthropologist said this about the sacred. Anyone like to read that? Maybe Ms. What's her name? Let's see here. No, I know who you are. Where is Ms. Baird? You're over in the corner, right, Ms. Baird? Yeah, okay. Want to read this, Ms. Baird? Or no? Huh? What's on the PowerPoint? Please. Can you see it? Keep going. Excellent. Peter Metcalf in his article on the sacred for the Dictionary of Anthropology. Yeah, short, sweet, and actually it says quite a bit there. There's a lot that's interesting there. The sacred is a class of things, but also sacred events, happenings that happen. I just mentioned the Lord's Supper, which was Jesus' last meal with his followers. That Christians, both Catholics especially, but also Eastern Orthodox Christians, reenact every Sunday, perhaps even every day in their churches. Okay? It's a sacred event. Just a meal, getting together with friends to eat. But it becomes sacred because of its religious connotation. Or beings, sacred beings like the gods or the spirits, okay, those that are part of the supernatural, that are not ordinary. They're not the typical things that you encounter in ordinary normal life. It's abnormal in a sense, but not in a bad sense. Maybe I would say non-normal. Okay? It's like, when you're watching like a soccer match or something, and they get I always, it's added time. They add on some extra time for stoppages and stuff like that. So, you get the full amount of play. And they get these announcers who are like, yeah, we're getting into non-normal. We're leaving normal time now. It's like, so what is it? Added time is abnormal time. It's not the same thing. The clock isn't still working the same. What is it? Weird time, something. There's been some kind of displacement. Anyways. So it's a quality of difference. This sacredness is different from us. It's different from the normal. If it's not normal, then it's different. Okay? And is more important than the profane world. We haven't gotten to this word profane yet. I guess I didn't put it on the PowerPoint. I probably should have. Apologize for that. But this word profane is really, it's just anything that's not sacred. I mean, it's as simple as that. What's the definition of the profane? It's anything that's not sacred. It's the opposite, basically. Anything that's not dedicated to a god. It's what happens outside of the temple or the church. Profanum. Two words. Pro, which means in front of. Phanum is the word for a temple or a shrine. So anything outside of the temple is profane. So the things that you can do outside the temple are profane. And they're different from what you can only do inside of the temple. Right? You can't, we don't, if you're say from a Christian background or something like that, you usually don't bump into these sorts of issues. But in other religions that we're learning, you will, Hinduism or Islam, Islam, as I told you in the last class, you can't walk into a mosque dressed as you have to take off your shoes. If you're a female, you have to dress a certain way, have your head covered to your wrists and to your ankles. You can't sit with the men, and the men can't sit with you. In fact, you can't really sit anywhere. The women are off in their own little section with a barrier, okay? So you create your own space even for them. All right, are you usually, is that how it's going to be when you go outside the mosque? Like you go into the 7-Eleven, or are you going to put all the women in a separate room and okay, let all the men get their Twinkies first and their Slurpees, and then the women can come in, and is that how you're going to treat the women? Walk into McDonald's and be like, wait a second, you got to take your hat off or put a veil on, Something like if you go to a synagogue, guys have to put a little yarmulke on, a little hat, cover your head, right? No shirt, no shoes, no servants. No veil, no servants in some places. Even out of the mosque. But usually that's not what happens, Out in the secular, as we say, world, the profane world, you're allowed to do things that in the sacred place you're not allowed to do. Use your inside voice, right? Use your inside voice. Although, as I said, with Christians, it's different. It's weird because there's kind of a loss of the sacred that has not been lost maybe in other religions. Like you don't yell or scream in a mosque. I don't know if you would do it in a monastery or a temple in Hinduism. But people yell and scream, and kids are running around all over the place in Christian churches and stuff like that. It used to be no. There was decorum because it was a sacred place, and there were places you couldn't go. Like you never would go up on the sanctuary where the altar is, where the priest would be. You would have a barrier that had have like a little wall that would block it off from people. You go into some churches, especially in the Eastern traditions, the Orthodox churches, they have a whole wall that goes almost to the roof, the whole screen with doors. So they really block it off from the sight of the people. You can't enter unless you're a priest or a deacon. There are certain doors you can enter in and out of because it's a sacred space. Not normal. So you don't act the same way that you act outside of the temple in the profane places. Okay? And why don't you do that in the profane world? And profane here does not mean, it's not meant in any negative sense. Right? It's not meant, we use it in a negative sense, like we say profanity is like, offensive language or swear words and stuff like that. No, that's not what, it's we use it negatively, but it's not being used negatively. There's nothing wrong with the profane world. It's just not as important as the sacred world. So that's why you have to do things differently in the sacred world. Because in the profane world, we're just dealing with each other. But in the sacred world, you're dealing with ultimate reality, what really matters, the gods. You have to piss the gods off, Like you show the god your back, which is considered insulting in some cultures, Turn your back to the god, the statue of the god. No. You are always facing the god, even when you leave your back out. You never show your back. Or you only walk around the god on your right, because right is associated with goodness. And the left is badness, So you don't want to show the bad side to the god. So you make sure that if you walk around, it's always to the right. Backwards. You don't insult the god. Why? Because, I don't know, God might give you chicken pox or something. You know, cause a drought in the community, you know. So you don't want to offend the sacred. Or if you don't like that image, you don't want to disrupt something. You don't want to think of it in the sense of gods and goddesses and spirits and beings. In some religions, it's more not so much the gods and goddesses, but the disruption, the equilibrium of the cosmos. You know, the balance between light and dark and good and bad, male and female. You don't want, you don't want to disturb that, which you can if you show no concern for the sacred and all your concern is for the profane world. All right. See what's on the next slide. Ooh, Peter Connolly, Approaches to the Study of Religion. That was one of my textbooks that I used. It's a quote from that. Is it quoted in? Yeah, quoted in. Oh, I didn't put, no, that's a mistake. I forgot to put the editor's name, but whatever. Hold on a second. We go back. Where are we here? There we go. Oh, patterns. Well, I think it was one of the textbooks I used, but I didn't put it on the PowerPoint as an example. That's all right. The sacred, the belief in the sacred is the only really crucial element. And I think that's probably true. When the sacred is present, we have religion. When it's absent, we don't. Okay? If you want just a basic delineator, ultimate reality. Even though there, as I think I showed you, we talked about football a little bit, and I talked about football games and sports and stuff like that. There's kind of an overlap, you know. Sports have sacred texts, they have rule books, they have authorities like the referees who tell you what to do, and even dress differently. You have uniforms, so you have special clothing you're supposed to wear when you play the game. The reality within the pitch or the field or the plane or whatever is not the same as normal places, you know. You can only throw a ball backwards in some cases. You can't be in front of the last defenders on the team or you're offside and stuff like that. Because that, you know, I made that up, you know. I can't walk in front of you. I can't walk behind you. I can't throw the ball to you. I have to throw it back to you. That's not normal, you know. But it is for the sport if you want to play the sport normally. So there's overlap in human experience. But what's, I think, ultimacy and transcendence are the things that maybe differentiate, okay? Because ultimately, let's think of politics, because politics can also take the trappings of religion, you know. Some very clearly, you know. But, you know, an election comes and goes. It doesn't define the cosmos, who's president of the United States right now, or who was president of the United States before or will be in the future, okay? Doesn't affect the movement of the planets, you know. Our galaxy's going to still be there. No, I doubt a galaxy, if it has any feelings, cares. You know, I would imagine so. If our galaxy were conscious, which I'm not sure. But there's no ultimacy to this. There's no transcendence to it. You know, you place your vote and it has a meaning, okay? But it has a meaning for that particular sense of time. But it doesn't transcend all reality, whereas certain religious actions do. They tap into the timeless. They affect everything, the whole cosmos. Okay, anyway. So religion, my definition is it's the ways. It is a name. It is a word. It is a word. Oh, go away. It is a word that's been taken. Nothing wrong with that, I guess. You could use other words. But it's a name for the ways in which humans recognize the existence of this ultimate reality and interact with it. The various ways that human beings throughout history and different cultures and societies try to interact with this non-normal reality they think is there. And so we call that religion. All right. I'll go with that. It's my definition. I can maybe simplify it and say it's just the ways in which people interact with ultimate reality. But, whatever. And it is a human thing, it's something that we humans create. We create the structures. The world's religions are our creations. Yes, in some cases the religions claim that they've been sent by a god or given by a god. That's fine. But, what you see, the buildings, the people, you don't see the gods necessarily. You see the buildings, the people, the rituals, and they usually look a lot like the cultures that they emerged from. Okay, there's a lot of interrelation between that. So it's something that you don't have religion without humans. Okay, it's something that humans do. It's like humans play music, humans play sports, etc., and so forth. And we give words to those things: music, sports. Nothing wrong with that, I don't think. Nothing wrong with calling it religion if we notice that there is some kind of family resemblance, that there's something there. And we can study it. I mean, I think you have to be able. There has to be something there if you're going to study it. Otherwise, as I said before, close up shop. Send back your PhD in religious studies, because you might as well majored in like comic books, as I said. And this course it's technically denoted as RS, yes, RS for religious studies, yes, Mr. Zilke on the end. Okay, good, Mr. Zilke. Which is okay. I mean, technically, it's not religious studies, because it's not. If I were teaching this at like the University of Pennsylvania or someplace, I don't know. University of Pennsylvania was it founded by the Baptists first? Might have been founded as a religious school. I get another, Lehigh University, okay? A secular school, state school. It's not, or is Lehigh private too? But it's not religious, right? This is a religiously oriented school. So yeah, we call it religious studies, maybe because we don't want to scare people, I guess, or be inclusive, not call it theology, because that might sound like you're trying to convert people or impose a certain viewpoint, which I'm not. But theology is involved here. I'm a theologian teaching world religions. What's the difference? Because there is a difference. Religious studies is not theology, even though you're going to have to talk about gods and goddesses and demons and spirits and all sorts of stuff. Okay, but it's not theology. What is it then? Well, I mean, simply put, it's religious studies. You're studying religion. All right, fine. But I study my religion too. Okay, even though I'm a theologian and not a religious studies scholar per se. So this is where religion is evaluated and studied, but the difference is that it's studied like any other human phenomenon. Okay, doesn't matter whether you believe in the religion you're studying. A Hindu who's teaching Hinduism, but you could also teach Islam. I'm a Christian, but I'm teaching you about several different religions in this course, including Christianity. But I'm not going to treat Christianity different from the other religions. That doesn't mean I don't believe in it. Like I'm turning off some button in my head and say, okay, I'll act like Christianity isn't the true religion anymore. No, I believe in it. So I'm open with that. I want to, tell you what my biases are. But when we come to world religions, and I talk about Judaism and Christianity, I'm not going to privilege them over other religions. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to study them the same way historically, archaeologically, whatever, that I would look at Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism that I don't believe in. Right? Doesn't mean I don't have respect for those religions, but I just don't follow them. Okay? I'll be fair to them. That's what, you're supposed to be objective. I think that's a dirty word now, because no one's really objective, right? We all have I mean, at least for me, I have my biases, Mr. Sneed, my prejudices. I have my, things I like, things I don't like. Okay? Like for me, I think like Indian food is the greatest cuisine on the planet. Oh yes. Oh yes. Bhajis. Tikka masala, ras malai. Oh yeah. But I'm not a Hindu. I also love a bearded god. I love a religion with bearded gods. And Hindus got tons of them. I'm not really big into kosher food. It's all right, you know, but matzo ball soup is nice. But I'm sorry, keep it solid. Thank you, like that apple. Alanis Morissette song from the 90s. Alanis Morissette. Don't watch the video, but she's new to it. Genuinely, never need to see Alanis, but you know, she's an artist. Anywho, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so you're trying, but you know, objectively, in the sense that I have to recognize my own biases, my likes, my dislikes, and basically it's another being fair, fairness. You know, not getting up here and saying, you know, oh, boo this other religion because it's not mine, or I'm an atheist, I believe there are no gods, and religion is a bunch of hooey. So I'm going to show you how silly religion is, or something like that. No, you're being fair and you're trying to present the ideas and the histories of each religious belief system fairly and accurately. And maybe if you have some criticisms, yeah, fine. You know, you can maybe state them. But it's supposed to be objective, an objective study, descriptive and non-judgmental. You might also say more describing what people believe and what I as a scholar see people believing, describing to you what they believe, but not judging whether it's right or wrong, true or false. Okay, just looking at what the evidence is, the data. So it is a unique field of studies. It's like you can uniquely study politics or economics or anything else. If humans do it, you know, then you can study it, I guess. And it is what we might call an academic study. It's usually reserved to academia, you know, people, eggheads in colleges and universities, yes. Anthropologists, sociologists, people like that. And with a lot of our modern sciences and arts, I guess arts and sciences, it arose in the 1800s in Europe and America, in the West. You might say the West. Of course, you might ask, well, what is the West? When we talk about the West, you kind of know it means Europe, right? North America, maybe South America to some extent. But what's it west of? Ever ask yourself that? Well, what's it west of? Why is it not the East? Why is it not the North? What is the West west of? Do I have some? Oh, yes, I do. I do have. Well, I've got one softball player here and a couple of basketball players. But at least for the softball, do they throw curveballs in softball? Can they do curveballs? Or is that illegal or something? They can do a curveball? Throwing you a little curveball. And it started with this gentleman, Friedrich Max Mueller, or sometimes just known as Max Mueller for short. He's considered the father of religious studies. I mean, you'll notice this if you, in any of the courses that you're taking in, like your major, social work, or if it's nursing or radiation, stuff like that. Most of the fields or history or whatever, education, you'll notice that if you study the history, usually they give a little historical introduction sometimes of where your field came from and originated, who are some of the major thinkers, and you'll find that most of the times it started in the 1800s, okay? You know, you had the Enlightenment occur in Europe, started in England and spread to the rest of Europe around the 1600s, which affected how people looked at the traditional way of doing things, especially analyzing and studying the world. The scientific methods started to be developed. People started thinking about human reason as the ultimate source of authority or the ultimate basis for making decisions or judgments rather than relying on, say, tradition, you know, what people have always believed or thought. Trying things out for yourself. You know, people think that, I don't know, if you do X, Y, and Z, then such and such will happen. Well, let's test that testing. You know, people really didn't do. They just accepted what people told them. Again, traditional explanations. Okay, in medicine and stuff like that, or the way the world worked. You know, um, whereas now in the Enlightenment period, people started saying, "Well, what about is that the case? Let's test that. Does my experience bear that out? What people are telling me?" Okay. Trying to think of an example. Any example pop into my head? Well, or no, it could be a number of things, but no, maybe some will pop into my head. So it's no different from religion. Everyone, and also, well, when we get to the influences, I'll get to that later. Like the evolutionary biology and history and stuff like that, historical studies, people, archaeology, people digging up rocks and stones and finding all sorts of monuments from the ancient world that they didn't know were there before. A lot of stuff was going on, and a lot of information was pouring into mainly the Western world, Europe and America, but especially Europe, and it was affecting how everyone wanted to treat everything. So Mueller just had the idea that, well, why should religion be so different? If we can study history, we don't have to accept all the traditional views from the past. We can now take the, say, historical record of the various historians, compare their manuscripts and their different versions of events, and try to piece together what happened and come up with a modern what you would call it, a modern field of history. Or we can, study languages and try to determine their sources and stuff like that, comparing them and stuff like that. We can, in the hard sciences, we can compare animals and we can dissect them and look at their organs and actually see how the body works rather than just kind of guessing, really, because people didn't usually cut open human bodies. I mean, if it happened, it happened. Like a person got cut apart in battle or something. People could see the organs and stuff like that. Or you could take animals. Obviously, if you're a meat eater and you're breaking down a chicken or something, and taking out the gizzard and the innards and stuff, you can see the organs, and people could do that. But typically, they did not dissect human bodies. Okay, the body was the corpse. The body was left complete for the most part. That was at least the prejudice. But it was only in like the time of the Enlightenment, people were starting to look more closely at what was in the human body to try and figure out how various things worked. Did blood move around like some kind of fluid, like the oceans? Like the oceans kind of undulated, like in waves, just kind of move through the body. Well, when you actually open up the body, well, you don't know if you don't look. You don't see what's going on in the body. It could be that way. All you know is that, if you get a cut, blood spurts out, right? You don't know how it's spurting out. But you cut open the body, you see the heart. Heart looks like a pump. It seems to act like a pump, and the blood doesn't seem to move through these tubules like just like the waves in an ocean or ripples in a river or ripples in a lake or something. They seem to be pushed. Okay. But they had to kind of cut open the human body to see that and make all sorts of drawings. And this was new to them, trying to figure out how the parts fit together. So why can't you do that with, say, religious belief? Religion, that was a revolutionary idea, because religion is one of those things where people just think, well, but that's the supernatural. That's not the material world. That's the sacred. That's not the profane. Okay. How do you study religion as if it's a profane subject? What do you do with all these competing claims of the existence of a god or many gods? Or which religion is the best, or ideas of revelation, whether gods are revealing themselves, and whether certain books are inspired by a god or the supernatural and other books aren't. How do you make those decisions? It's a touchy subject, as you can probably imagine. It can be very touchy if especially you believe in a certain religion and believe that others are wrong or misguided or whatever. Nevertheless, Max Mueller, 1823 to 1900, was a German scholar, German extraction. I think he was from Prussia. He wasn't from Germany. He was from the Prussian Empire, which is part of the German Empire. There, okay, the Prussia was this group. Well, Well, it was this region of mainly Eastern Europe, Poland, what's today modern day Poland, parts of Eastern Germany. I think maybe the Czech Republic and Slovakia were part of it as well. But anyways, and it was, largely it was dominated by Germans. Okay, so you find a lot of people from Prussia who spoke German and were of German ethnicity, and hence the Prussian Empire was kind of aligned with another German empire, which included other parts of modern day Germany, which was not the same as Prussia. They're kind of like allied with each other. Hence, when I say he's German, he's not Germany from Germany. He's German from Prussia, Prussian German. And he was a language scholar. He started out as a linguist, and he emigrated to Great Britain and taught at Oxford University, famous Oxford University in England. Thanks be to God. So he wrote in English a lot of his works. I don't have to read them in German, even though I studied German, but, anyways. And he was he became a pioneer in this comparative study of religion. His study of language actually led him to start studying religion, because he noticed and people, he wasn't the only one, people were noticing similarities among some of the ancient languages of the world. For example, the ancient language of India, which is called Sanskrit. I'll talk more about this when we get to Hinduism. But Sanskrit, when Westerners started to encounter it, which also, again, started around the time of the Enlightenment, people started, in the 1700s, a lot through the British Empire, because the British were all over India, as well as other groups were. You had, French outposts in India and colonies from Denmark and stuff like that, Portugal, and they were encountering now, for the first time, the variety of Indian culture and their languages and stuff. And this ancient Indian language, Sanskrit, looked very much in its grammar, in some cases in its words, like Latin, which they would have studied and known from their schooling in the West, in Europe, because Latin plays a big part in the history of Western Europe, as well as Greek. So also ancient Greek. And almost everybody back then, if you were going to be a scholar of any sort, you had to study Latin and Greek. So they noticed these similarities: Greek, Latin, Sanskrit. That's weird. They all seem to have some of the same words for stuff. The grammar is very similar in a lot of cases. Maybe there's a relationship, but India is on the other side of the world. German, Italy, where Latin comes from, ultimately, it's on the other side of the world from India. What happened here? How did these languages become so similar? Did it just happen independently, or were there migrations of some sort? People moved to India, or people moved to Europe with these languages and they developed. So he's studying it. And he used his knowledge of language that led him into, most of their encounter with the languages of, say, India or Asia were through religious texts. Most of the texts were not history books or cookbooks, or, people were religious and they wrote about their gods and goddesses. So, if you're going to study their language or know something, you're going to read their mythologies. And so you just kind of fell into he kind of fell into the religious aspect of it through his language study, because those were the majority of the texts that you had to work with. Most of the literature of the ancient world is religious in most cultures, because that was what was really important to people. Not keeping laundry lists. Although, if you dig around long enough, you will find papyri and stuff of people with their writing down of ancient laundry lists that people wrote down and stuff like that. So people did keep records of those. But like the real records, the ones you wanted to keep for posterity that were constantly copied over and over were usually religious. And so he translated. As a linguist, he learned these languages like Sanskrit and stuff, and he started translating these religious texts, most of them for the first time for a lot of Westerners, into English, again, thanks be to God, and not into German. And so these texts were published as the Sacred Books of the East series, this multi-volume work. I think maybe I have it here in my notes. Do I have how many volumes it was? But many, many volumes. It's still out there. It's in the public domain. So I give you a link if you ever want to track it down and look for stuff. And it's still a very important work, even though it's so old. Because in some cases, at least for a long, long time, maybe not so much now as people have started to, get into religious studies and translate things, but for the longest time, these were the only ways you could get some texts in translation, in English translation, was through the Mueller's work on this multi-volume work. Not just him, but other scholars as well, translating these books for the Sacred Books of the East series. So it still is useful. And I use some of it for some of the readings. I try to look for more modern translations if they're available. In some cases, they're not. It's still this book from over 100 years, or this bunch of books from over 100 years ago. So it's still important for religious studies. Now, Mueller came up with his own theories about what he thought religion was, and as a linguist, you can be probably not shocked, Mr. Frank, that they had to do with language. His basic theory. His basic idea was that the words used to describe the supernatural actually kind of transformed into the name for the thing, for the God. So the words that were used to describe what people thought were gods become actually the names of the gods. So, for example, and you do see this happen sometimes, if you hear thunder and you have the word in your language for thunder. I'll just use thunder, okay? In our language, in English. And you say, oh, it's thunder, but you think it's also, you don't think it's just, you might know, or we know that thunder is just like with the electricity and the electrons and stuff, and from the clouds rubbing together, and it makes noise, right? The clouds are rubbing together and they create, what is it, static electricity? No, that's lightning. Static electricity is the lightning. But anyways, we might know how it works now, but ancient people, you hear a noise and you think the noise is coming from something. There's something there in the cloud making the noise, which you start calling thunder and maybe addressing as thunder even, oh, thunder, please give us rain. You may be associated with rain. So you want rain. So you say, well, I'll ask thunder for rain. Because thunder's up in the clouds where the rain comes from. So maybe he knows, or she knows, how to make it rain. So, and maybe if I kind of double down and up the ante and like slit a goat's throat and pour its blood out all over the earth and offer it, to show thunder how really much I want it to rain, thunder will do that for me. The word becomes the God. That's his theory, but, no one follows that in religious studies. His theory has long been forgotten, is largely forgotten. But his contribution, and why he's the father of religious studies, is because he showed that it was possible, and he made the argument for examining religion in a systematic way, not examining it solely from the perspective of faith, but examining religion rationally as any other topic of human activity, okay? Observing and describing it, which might think, well, Doug, but people just didn't think that way, all right? That's why, that's why it was called, it's the Enlightenment. It was a revolutionary period in human history, all right? People usually didn't think of things that way. You just didn't do that with religion, okay? Or there was a very deep respect for tradition across the board. This is what we were told, or why things happen. Well, why don't you go back and read the earlier histories and see if that's how they describe it, see if what you were told was true. No. You accept what you were told happened and why it happened, right? There was a deep respect for tradition. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just trying to help you get into the mindset of how this kind of overturned how they, and you can also see how it maybe excited people were. This is like really fresh. They knew, it's almost like they knew something was a buzz, this was different, And then when results came from it, like you actually discovered where germs were coming from, not just what people told you. You started discovering and figuring out how the organs of the human bodies were working. Not just what you thought from touching and palpating and blah, 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 which was the old form of medicine, Move the body here, feel just through touch and feeling, really, okay? It was exciting. And some people were scared how he was treating religion, but anyways. But that's why he's remembered and seen as the father, because he was showing how, he made the argument for we should do this with religion as well. Okay, and see what we can learn from it. Now, although it is a unique field of study, religious studies, it's not really a science as commonly understood. Okay, it's not science. It is, however, scientific. There are fields of study that are scientific, but they're not science. What do I mean by that? Maybe it's on the next one. Oh, wait a second. Okay, I'll come back to that. Even though, as you can see here, he describes it as the science of religion. Okay? In his introduction to the science of religion. This is the really important one, though. Natural religion is Gifford Lectures. The Gifford Lectures are given in Scotland, some university in Scotland, I believe. I think they're still given to this day. And usually, some scholar will give a series of lectures. They'll be asking a series of lectures on a certain topic. And the lectures are collected and they're usually published in a book. So his books on the study of religion were published as the Gifford Lectures in 1881. All of this is in the public domain. It's all on Internet Archive, I believe, that you can find it if you want to read it for yourself. Thanks be to God in English, as I said. Just gotta get back. Oh, science, yes. I'll usually reserve science for what we call the hard sciences, okay? Biology, geology, all right? Astronomy, right? Stuff where you do lab work, laboratory stuff, all right? I'll reserve it for that because that's usually what I think pops into most modern minds, modern heads when you talk about science. People usually don't think of the study of religion as a science or even theology as a science or history as a science, but they are. They're scientific because all science means is knowledge. Scientia in Latin means knowledge, to know. Scientia from scio in Latin, to know something. Okay? And yeah, in the Middle Ages and the ancient world, the word science was used in a much broader way than it came to be used. Whereas, again, during the Enlightenment, it was the word science for some people thought, well, really true knowledge is being found through the experiential method, testing things, coming up with theories and testing them, which we associate with the scientific method. Yes, you can call it the scientific method. And so we really reserve it for that. And other things like literature, even mathematics to a certain extent. But literature, philosophy, history, those are more arts, right? So at a university, you have arts and sciences together, right? And some of the arts are more scientific, and religious studies is scientific. It uses the tools of what we might call the hard sciences to study religion. But it is more of an art than a hard science. And it's not the only field of study. Okay? Actually, I should put that up there. Anthropology, sociology, psychology, history, archaeology, stuff like that, are more arts than sciences because there's interpretation involved. Okay? Isn't there interpretation in the hard sciences? Yes, there is. Which is why I highly recommend that if you're going to do the sciences, nursing or anything, radiation therapy, do a minor in philosophy. Really, I highly recommend it. Because philosophy teaches you how to think. It helps, it exercises the mind on how to think. And yes, you get also, in the hard sciences, you get all sorts of data thrown at you, numbers and all sorts of things. But the interpretation of it, then that's the important thing, right? You then have to figure out what the data means, what the numbers mean that come back. What are the results of the lab test? What does it mean for the patient or for whatever? So I'm not saying there isn't an interpretational aspect to even the hard sciences, but other things like psychology or anthropology, maybe not so much, you know? Not in the same way. More of it is the data you're given, it's more subjective, more interpretational, okay? And I would say that these are more religious studies and other fields like, say, psychology or anthropology. They're science-like. So that's why I like to say that religious studies is not science, but it is scientific, okay? Each of these fields kind of picks and chooses various tools from the hard sciences, but there is a heavy interpretational aspect, a heavy subjective aspect, where you have to say, what does this data mean? So just take psychology. If you had to take psychology or something. You know, psychology is full of all sorts of theories about how human behavior works. All sorts of theories. All competing with each other. You know, all have different views. I mean, if you take systems in psychology, which is where they kind of give you an overview of the various theories, you know, from Freud to Carl Jung to Carl Rogers, you know, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the big thing now is cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff like that. That seems to be the flavor of the day. About 40 or 50 years ago, it was what did Carl Rogers call it? Client-centered therapy, and before that it was Freudianism, it was psychotherapy, right? Psychodynamism, okay? How do you know, and yet, so you have all these different theories of how the mind works, but also you have science, you know, psychology also kind of dips into science. We have psychometrics. You give all sorts of inventories and tests to people, and they answer questions, and you get numbers coming back. And of course, you have to learn statistics, right? It's a big part. If you're going to do social work and stuff like that, one of your courses along the way is going to be statistics, yes? You have to learn statistics to learn how to analyze within the margins of error as well, as they say, what the data means that you get back on all these inventories and assessments that you give. And you even have labs. You have psych labs, okay, where you have a room or something where you administer these tests and stuff like that. So it kind of imitates the hard sciences. So you even have laboratory work and stuff like that. But it's not exactly the same, okay? Because in the hard sciences, you know, if you're a geologist studying rocks and you do some carbon dating, you know, it comes back with information. And the information simply is what it is. Now you can, you know, it gives you an idea of maybe how old the rock is that you found or something like that, or tells you what the rock is made of, all right? Unless you did something wrong in your process, which, how do you know? Well, other people test it. They test your work. You say, well, you know, this person said, you know, we found a rock that's almost as old as the Earth. It's almost 4 billion years old. Okay, well, we'll take a piece of the rock at our university. We'll test it. Oh, we only have it down here as 200 million years coming back. What did you do? You know, then you look over, how did you test this? You know, did you do something wrong in your process? All right. You can't really do that and say something like psychology because you're dealing with human beings and how they feel and and them telling you what's going on in their mind and how their mind might be working or not working. Okay. So it's much more interpretational. What does it mean? An anthropologist might do, you know, a lot of interviewing with anthropology. You have, your informants, and you interview and you talk and you learn the languages of the culture. You live in the culture for usually long periods of time to get a sense of the culture, to understand the culture. But again, it's scientific in a certain way. You have to learn languages. It's experiential, but it's very interpretational. Then you, as an anthropologist, have to start making sense of, well, why do the people in this culture do such and such? Where did it come from? What does it tell us about human beings or humanity? Because it's anthropology. Anthropos, humanity. It's very subjective. And religious studies is the same way. You're describing what you see, what people tell you what they mean by what they're doing. Okay? It's not just numbers or data that's spit out from your computer. Okay? There's a lot of, it's very subjective and interpretational. So it's science-like, or you might say they're artistic sciences. Religious studies is an artistic science, it's my term, which does use methodologies to study religion. So, for example, some religious studies scholars will apply neuroscience, how the brain works, and they might use that to understand how people in some religions say they have visions of the supernatural. They say they see the gods, or they've seen Virgin Mary, the mother of Christ, appear, or they use what was my other neuroscience. And they might use historical research to trace how beliefs might have developed within the community. Where did early beliefs come from, or ideas and stuff like that? Archaeology, archaeology is not a hard science, although, you do find a lot of hard things in more ways than one, but a lot of stones and pottery. What do those tell us about the religion? Okay, and how maybe old it is, or its belief, because if you can carbon date certain things, and you have an image, for example, of the god Vishnu and carved into a piece of stone, and you can figure out, it's at least 6,000 years old. Well, that gives you some kind of terminus, some kind of idea of how long this religion has been around for. Okay? So you use some of the methodologies and the techniques of the hard sciences to understand. Strap up a bunch of equipment to a yogi who's doing his yoga meditation and can really slow his heart rate and his breathing apparently at will through his meditation and his stretching exercises. Well, use medical technology to figure out what's going on here. Put stuff on his head to see what's going on in his brain or her brain when this is going on. Okay, so you're using like the hard sciences but then you have to interpret it. It doesn't tell you what does it mean for the yogi that he's doing this? Why is he doing this? That's another question. The hard sciences are not good really at answering the question of why, but they're very good at what. What is going on here? What is this? They don't usually go to why it's happening. All right? So it's interpretation. So scientific, artistically so, more of an art than a science, religious studies. But they do sometimes use scientific methods or scientific methodologies and tools to study religion. Okay? Religious studies, and that's what my picture's on the next PowerPoint. We just, like this is anthropology. This is a famous anthropologist called Malinowski, Polish guy, Polish dude, sitting there with the Trobriand Islanders of Papua New Guinea, which I once lived in for 9 months. I never went to the Trobriand Islands, but that's where he went. And he was, this is very influential in anthropology because no one did this. I mean, he's actually there living with the people he's studying, okay, the native peoples of the island. He learned their language, which you might think is like obvious, right? If you're going to be an anthropologist, you want to study a culture, you want to learn about the people. But most anthropologists, it wasn't practiced this way in the 18. This is the 1900s actually. Throughout much of the 1800s, anthropology, they were called armchair scholars. They sat in their libraries in their chairs and they read books by other people who maybe had traveled somewhere. And then they came up with these great theories about culture and societies and stuff that they had never visited, whose languages they didn't know. And this guy Malinowski, it's called the Malinowski Revolution, he took anthropology off the veranda, as they say, off the porch. Just like, the scholar in his chair on the porch, like, yeah, what do you think the Aborigines are like in Australia? I don't know, Bob. Well, what could we imagine? Well, I read this book. Oh, what the book tell? Malinowski actually got up off the porch and was like, you know what? I'll go to Australia. I'll go and see what these people are like. I'll learn how they think and how they speak. It was a revolution. Psychology with Sigmund Freud. Yes, our friend Sigmund Freud. Do I get for reading from Freud? And I don't think I do. But anyways, what is for him? What is religion? Religion is it's wish fulfillment. It's we're all kind of still, no matter how big our bodies are and how mature they've become, we're all still really just little babies, little children who are afraid of the world and want some father figure to take care of us and tell us that everything's all right because the world is a nasty place. So we wish gods and goddesses, and we also want relationships. So we want to create a relationship with the cosmos. So we create gods to relate to. That's his view of where religion comes from. Okay, archaeology I've mentioned. I forget who this is. Might be Mark. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's Linus. Anthropology, not anthropology, sociology, human societies. Okay. How do societies group themselves? How does that affect their religious beliefs and how they group them? How a particular society groups itself as a tribe or with a king or democratically or no way. How does that impact their view of the gods and stuff like that? Or psychology, looking at the brain processes, see what the brain does when people have certain religious experiences. But it's all dedicated to what's called this scholarly method, which is three things basically. Okay? That you don't appeal to principles or criteria that are in principle unavailable to others. Okay? So, for example, when I was younger, because I have always loved religions and, especially, small religions, weird religions that people don't know a lot about. But, and I'd read these books written by pastors and ministers about, what does the Bible say about Mormonism? What does the Bible say about the Jehovah's Witnesses? What does the Bible say about Islam? Okay, always the Bible. So that was it made sense. They were Protestant pastors. So for them, their standard of authority was the religious text, the Bible. All right, but that's not how an academic field works, okay? Because the Bible, in principle, is unavailable to a Muslim or Jehovah's Witness. Well, I shouldn't say Jehovah's Witness. Not in the same sense, because they do have the Bible, obviously. And so do the Mormons, Latter-day Saints. But they don't read it in the same way, interpret it in the same way. Let's stick with, say, the Muslims who don't accept the Bible. You're judging them by something which they can't appeal to because they don't accept it as a standard for their religion. You're judging them by your criterion, which is not available to them because Muslims don't believe the Bible is a sacred book. It's a good book in some ways, but it's also a very faulty book. The Quran is the book from God. So to kind of reverse it, if like I were a Muslim and I wrote a book like, what does the Quran say about Christianity? What does the Quran say about some other religion, Hinduism or something? Same problem. Okay, well, Hindus don't accept the Quran, nor do Christians. So you're appealing to a criterion that in principle is not unavailable. Doesn't mean it's not valid. It's valid for you if you're a Christian or Muslim or Hindu or whatever, if you want to appeal to your religious text. But in that case, you're doing more theology. You're not doing religious studies. Also, the scholarly method involves a thorough investigation of the topic. You should basically know what you're talking about. You should be familiar with the topic. Okay? If you're going to talk about, well, it's not just writing down information, although there can be a lot of information. All right? But you want to show in the what makes it academic is that you're showing that you've really and deeply, hopefully, thought about the subject. You've examined not just the other points of view, but even your own point of view. Okay, and you lay this out. Okay, because you have to. People don't know what's in my mind. So that's why books can sometimes get so long, because you have to kind of lay out the whole process of how you arrived at a certain conclusion. You may have already come to the conclusion after thought, but you have to. Most of a book is laying out the process before, so people can examine it and, like, say, testing. They can test the testing in a hard science sense. They can look for errors in your thought, like this is illogical, or this is, you're making an assumption here that you haven't proven. So it can collapse your whole argument if there are enough of them, or it can support it if it all is hanging together. Someone might say, "Yeah, I can see." It might even accept what you're saying. Yeah, the evidence that you're presenting and your thoughts seem to make sense, but you have to show that you've done that. And you should be willing to apply the same tools and methods of analysis to your own beliefs, whatever they are, as you would to others. Okay? In other words, you're playing fair. I mean, just another simple way of saying playing fair. Okay? If you're going to talk about religion, like I'm going to talk about Islam, say, for example, in this course, and I'm going to talk about the history of Islam, where the practices came from. Some of them Muslims might not agree with in the course. It might be hard to hear in some cases. Might not like it. Okay, but as I said, I'm not going to suddenly switch gears when it comes to something I believe in, like Christianity, and use and change and move the goalposts, as they might say. Okay, I'm not going to use history or talk about where things came from in Christianity, because it all came from God. So that's just the end of the story. Even if I believe that. But no, in fairness, I will use the same tools of, say, history, literature, literary studies, to look at my beliefs too. I got you. God bless you. I'll see you all on Thursday. And the time flew, it felt like. Have a good day, sir. Thank you. All right, so, well, it has to be. It has to be. What is this? More of the same. Have a good day. Have a good day, miss. Thank you. Have a good day, sir. You're welcome, sir. You're welcome, sir. Have a good day. See you on Thursday. Have a good day. Yes, you're welcome, miss. Thank you. You're welcome. Have a good day. Good day. All right, so I guess I'll probably cut all this out. Hello, people in TV land.